Okay, we are live. This is I guess, a special impromptu mini-sode of the MMA Outsiders, if you want to call it that. My name's Zain Bando. He's Pat Danna, and we're here today to deliver, I guess you could say, a little bit of breaking news about a week out from UFC 309 between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic. Pat, how are you on this Friday afternoon and a week that's been, I guess, a relatively slow week in the world of MMA?
Yeah, it seems like it's been a slow week in the world of MMA for everyone but me. I mean, I've been covering the IMMAF World Championships, and yesterday I found out I will be covering UFC 309, Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, in person as a member of the media. So I couldn't be more happy about that, and I'm very interested to be able to talk about these recent developments now, especially with me covering the event.
For sure. So for those of you guys who don't know, you can find Pat's work over at Combat Sports UK. That's the outlet that he's going to be covering the event for. And even this is your first official UFC event as a member of the media, I have to assume that that you're probably pretty excited, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't be more ecstatic. I'm still not. It still wasn't fully set in. I think I still haven't fully realized the actual like I don't know, just magnitude of this. You know?
Oh, for sure. And and I guess speaking of magnitude, I think we had some recent developments surrounding the main event. So there's been some newer info that has come out of UFC 309. So I guess we can get into it. Jon Jones did an interview with Kevin Iole, formerly of Yahoo Sports. He now runs his own website, keviniole.com, and he essentially said in so many words that he would rather fight Alex Pereira and Tom Aspinall, assuming that he gets past Stipe Miocic next Saturday. And I just first wanted to say I thought his answer was very, very interesting and very, very telling. Well, obviously get into it more in just a couple minutes, but what were your initial reactions once it came out, kind of where Jones's head is at moving into, I guess, the twilight of his career, if you will, assuming he does end up beating Miocic next week?
I mean, my initial reaction was like, all right. I mean, we're not getting this fight. You know, like I think this was like the nail in the coffin, I guess you could say,
Right.
of the potential Jones versus Aspinall fight. This just based on his words and the way he said it, seemed like he really just he's over it. He's done. Stop bringing up Aspinall. Like it's not in the question anymore for his career. So that's just my initial reaction on it.
For sure, and I'm going to stick with the same point I've stuck with for months now. I think this is very disappointing. You want to talk about legacy. You want to talk about the greatest of all time. You want to talk about pound for pound status. I think you and I can sit here comfortably in our respective locations remotely and say that Jon Jones is more than likely the greatest fighter that MMA has ever seen. But I think him saying this and him putting it out there publicly, I think, is a disdain to Aspinall, and I'm going to explain why. You essentially forced Aspinall to step aside to win the UFC Interim Heavyweight Championship. And now, given the reasoning that Jones just gave, it's almost like the Interim Heavyweight Championship is essentially pointless. So to not even remotely do anything with it anymore, to say that you're not going to unify the belt, I think is wrong. And I know that there are people out there that say, oh, Zain Jones has proven everything. He's done everything. He can ride off into the sunset. I don't disagree with that. But when the promotion has put an interim title on you, and the expectation of the champion is to unify the belt, to give that respect to the number one contender, and Jones is choosing not to do that, I just think is morally wrong from a champion's perspective. And again, I know people will disagree with me, but if you look back over the course of UFC history, when we've had some of these unification fights, they've eventually become some of the greatest fights in UFC history. And this may be my bias showing a little bit, but this is a fight that I'm sure you want to see. I certainly want to see it. Hundreds of thousands of other people want to see it. I'm sure the entire country of England wants to see this fight. I think it's a real missed opportunity, and an opportunity to usher in a new era of the heavyweight division. And to me, him simply choosing not to do that for really no other reason other than his own, for whatever his legacy reason is, to me is just ridiculous. Because well, what if somehow the unexpected happens and Stipe Miocic at 42 result comes in and becomes the first guy to legitimately beat Jones.
That would
You know what
be,
you know
yeah,
what I
that would be a big mess up for any everyone involved. Basically, it would ruin a lot of plans. Basically,
for sure. And this is obviously no disrespect to Stipe, but I think you and I both know how a hypothetical matchup between Miocic and Aspinall would go, and I don't think it would go very well for the latter, if you know what I mean. So um, I mean, and I guess obviously people are going to have their own mixed reactions to this, but I guess a follow up that I do have to this, and we could talk about this a little bit more, is what do you think of him saying this now, 8 days removed from the fight itself? And I mean, and I guess is the debate essentially reinvigorated again as to is he still the greatest pound for pound fighter of all time? Because I've seen mixed reactions as to the and with him doing this firmly takes him out of the conversation, at least for the moment. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I see people going to that extreme, and I think it's very interesting.
yeah, no, I disagree with them going to that extreme for sure. I don't think this takes him out of the pound for pound top status. I think it definitely, it's a blemish to think about, but it's a weird thing to think about because there's a lot going on here. It's not as plain as just an interim championship fight. There's a lot happening at once with this fight and then that potential fight of Jones versus Aspinall. And I don't know. Like, I understand why Jones wanted to fight Miocic instead of Aspinall first. He wanted to get
Right.
Stipe, wanted to get that greatest heavyweight of all time on his resume. But to then say you're not going to defend against the interim champion that's been waiting for a very long time, and after Jones
18 months.
Miocic, even Jones Miocic, after Jones Miocic got canceled the first time, Tom Aspinall had a claim to having this fight. It could have been Aspinall Jones in this fight, and I think people probably would have been happier. And Aspinall has his claim. There is no question about it, and I think he should get the title shot. But I also do kind of understand Jones's perspective a bit here of just he's only in it for the legacy fights at this point. He doesn't want to take the chance that Aspinall isn't one of the best fighters of all time and have that fight mean nothing in 10 years. He'd rather fight guys that have already established themselves as some of the best fighters of all time, which makes sense. I completely understand that from his perspective. The problem is the UFC is letting it happen. The UFC is letting him hold on to this heavyweight championship and just kind of, have legacy fights as the champion while they have an interim champion that's being held up in the process. It's a very complex situation, and I completely understand kind of why Jones doesn't want to fight Aspinall. As that champion, he should be defending against the interim, but it is a very weird situation in general. I think overall, though, if Jones fights Stipe and wins, he should retire if he's not going to fight Aspinall. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of people can come to that same consensus as well. And I think, I think the counter argument to your point about, Jones Aspinall, should it have happened first, whatever. I mean, I know that some people are going to be upset about this, and I know that based on literal numbers, the fight doesn't make sense. Could you imagine if the opposite would have happened, where it's Jones Aspinall and we never get the consensus greatest fighter of all time against the greatest heavyweight of all time? It would have been the same argument in reverse. Well, I think I think no matter what the UFC decided to do, no one was going to be happy, and that's clearly apparent. So,
I think the issue here is Jones saying he'd take a fight against Pereira next, but not Aspinall. That's where the issue lies. And that's where it kind of gets shaky because Pereira is a legacy fight at this point. Pereira is
right.
definitely a legacy fight for Jones. There's no question about it. But is he enough of a legacy fight like Stipe is that it's worth keeping Aspinall waiting, passing him up, and having the interim champion not even get the chance to unify the title while the champion is active and fighting? Like, is it really worth it? I don't
Right.
know. Like, I
Right.
don't know. Like, Stipe is the greatest heavyweight of all time. I can say that's worth it. But
Correct.
to make Aspinall wait a continued amount of time for Pereira, I mean, Pereira is great. And he has solidified his status in the sport's history
Oh,
so far.
100%.
But to
He's
say,
doing things
but
that no He's doing things that very few champions, if any, have ever done in such a short amount of time.
For sure, but he wasn't the best middleweight champion of all time. He
No,
may be on the way to being the best light heavyweight champion, but Jones was still the best. Chuck Liddell was still probably better. There's still probably guys you got to throw above him
for
there.
sure.
It's not the kind of legacy fight Stipe is, so I don't know if I give him the same excuse for taking a Pereira fight when Aspinall is still waiting, if that's what's going to happen. So that's why, in my opinion, it should just be fight Stipe, and if you want the legacy fight, vacate. I mean, I know it's going to suck. You don't want to vacate, but vacate. Fight for, know what they would know would be a perfect world, because the UFC likes to make interim championships for no reason sometimes, right?
All right.
You know what would be the perfect world? Jones drops the title.
Okay.
Aspinall's promoted to heavyweight champion. Just promoted. Okay?
Okay.
Jones fights Pereira in the interim title fight. So there can still be a belt on the line. So it's not for nothing, And then Jones
then it's I got it. Then it's current undisputed versus former undisputed for all the marbles.
If that's what happens, yes, but that's not gonna happen. That would have to be something the UFC forces. It wouldn't be something that just happens. Jones wouldn't just vacate for no reason.
Right, and then your argument that you just described is would be something straight out of the current state of professional boxing, would it not?
Yeah, probably. But I'm not saying that should happen. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying, in a perfect world, though, what would happen is Jones does end up fighting Pereira next in an interim heavyweight title fight. Aspinall gets promoted to heavyweight title. He fights a contender in the meantime. It hopefully defends, and then he'll fight the winner of Pereira Jones. And then if that happened, right? If Jones, let's say, beat Pereira and Jones was the interim champion, you think Jones would really want to end his career as the interim champion? No, he'd want to fight Aspinall. So if the UFC did do that, let's say, it would force Jones's hand then to fight Aspinall, literally force him almost, because he wouldn't want to end his career as the interim champion. So then that would be the perfect situation in the perfect world, in my opinion. But obviously, the chances of that happening are probably about 0.5% or less, not even that high, probably.
Well, don't give the UFC any good ideas because who knows, they might actually do that.
Hey, and someone might be able to say, there's a reason that's not a good idea, and here's why. And they could definitely be right. I'm not saying that's a foolproof idea by any means. Just off the top of my head, that seems like what the best solution for all MMA fans to be, for not all MMA fans, but for most MMA fans to be happy and get what they want.
So just to clarify a little bit, because I have some strong opinions on Jones before we end up wrapping up in the next few minutes, but just to clarify your overarching point, are you suggesting that if this Jones Pereira idea potentially moves forward, that I guess in so many respects, given where both guys are at in their careers, that the timing just doesn't make sense? Because to be quite frank with you, I think Aspinall I think Pereira still has more work to do at 205. So I don't particularly think that the timing to fight Jones now, when you still have Magomed and other contenders out there, makes the most sense.
Yeah, that's a fair argument for sure. He hasn't necessarily cleaned out his division. He has had a bunch of good wins, but realistically, it's only been Yuri, Hill, Yan, and then now Roundtree, which is, don't get me wrong, a ridiculous resume. But he hasn't necessarily cleaned out the division. There's still guys in that top 5, top 10 that he hasn't beat.
Right. So yeah, all this is just fascinating, because the simple thing the UFC could do is just let him retire and make Aspinall undisputed, but no one really wants to go through that. I'm on the side, and this is something I meant to say just a second ago, but now it's a perfect segue to it. I'm on the side that I think the Jones Aspinall fight happens if Jones wins. I agree with Ian when he says in every interview that he thinks Jones is actually going to fight him, and I think Jones is saying that because he isn't sure what the negotiations are going to look like. Because if you go back and look throughout the course of history, every single time a Jones fight has been canceled, even though it's been around, whatever it is, a failed drug test, a legal issue, it always somehow gets out that it simply came down to what the deal of the purse actually was. And I think this is sort of his way of saying, "Oh, give me the most money that anybody's ever been paid in UFC history." That's my that's my simple interpretation of it. I could be wrong. I could just be total. He's spitballing. This could be me really wanting to see Jones versus Aspinall. Oh, but that's the theory I'm going to believe in. I hope I'm right about that.
You're very possible. That could be his way of negotiating. This could have all be his way of negotiating and just trying to get the most money possible. Which, in my opinion, pretty smart. You know, if this is his way of doing it, pretty smart. Because it really seems like he has no interest in the fight, at least publicly. You know what I mean? So he's doing a good job at that.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I meant to say this earlier, but literally the time that we're recording this, he's interviewing with outlets besides ESPN that, quite frankly, I've never even heard of. So if he's going to those levels to give other outlets coverage of the end of his career, and he's going out of his way to speak to people he would otherwise rather not speak to outside of Kevin Iole and ESPN, of course. I think it's very telling that this is the beginning of a long farewell tour where we don't know how it's going to end. But simply put, this is just Jones being Jones, and there's nothing you can really do about it.
You know, it's a big
It's
thing to
the
point out.
mm-hmm. So, lastly, before we end this, because we're going to get into this more on the next episode of the MMA Outsiders, but with the fight being just about a week away, what is your early lean in the main event between Jones and Stipe? Obviously, Jones is a pretty heavy favorite, but I've seen tons of MMA pundits and purists online saying that, or if Stipe comes in shape, that the fight may be closer than what it actually indicates. What do you? What's what's your early temperature pulse as we get closer to fight week in the next couple of days? And I guess to follow up on that too, um, what are you? I guess what are you more nervous about to cover? Are you more nervous to cover the pre-fight press conference or the actual pay-per-view itself? Because I bet you the pre-fight press conference will be pretty interesting.
Oh, okay. So it's probably the pre-fight press conference to answer your second question real quick. It's probably the pre-fight press conference.
For
I'm
sure.
very interested to see how that will go, especially for Jon Jones, and
Right.
just very interested to see some of the answers he'll give and how those will affect some of my own questions. Because I feel like his media day specifically and his press conference, the questions like asked are going to be based on a lot of the answers he's giving. You know what I mean? People are going to be very interested in what his mindset is in the moment and some of the things he's been saying. So I think that's really what people are going to be getting into, and
Right.
that's what I think it's going to be really interested of. But what was the first thing you said?
Oh no, I was just asking what your early look is on the
Yes, yes,
fight,
yes.
given that we're about a week out.
So my early lean on the fight is I completely agree with those MMA pundits that you've seen online that have been saying that if Stipe comes in shape, it will be a tough fight for Jones. I've been of the belief that this was never going to be an easy fight for Jones, especially if Stipe does come in shape. But I have always thought Jones would win. I thought he would win a maybe close decision at one point. I thought he would maybe win a submission at one point, maybe a TKO with some ground and pound. Like I was all over the place. I've been in all three different levels of prediction for Jon Jones in this fight. But now as it's getting closer, I think I'm actually going to lean a Jon Jones decision here.
Okay.
I actually think people are overestimating how quick he finished Cyril Gahn and forgetting that Jon Jones isn't necessarily the biggest finisher.
He's not.
And
You have to
Stipe,
go you have to go back a substantial amount of years to find his last finish before the Gon fight, which is unbelievable to think about.
and I think since Stipe hasn't fought in so long, he's going to start off slow. I think Jones will probably be in control for the first round. And
Okay.
then second round, maybe Stipe will start to kick up a little bit, but it'll still be a Jones round kind of thing. Then
Okay.
fourth rounds is when we'll start to see Stipe wake up. And then I think we'll start to see him land with his boxing a bit. And then I think Jones will win one of 3, 4, 5 and get like a 48-47 decision, maybe 49-46 if he takes two of those. But I do think Stipe is going to give Jones a fight. I think he's going to test him on the feet for sure and give him problems with his boxing. Stipe is so good at adapting with his boxing.
Yeah, I'm gonna lean similarly. I think Jones wins. I think it's a late fourth round TKO finish, but I'm actually gonna go a little bit differently than you and say that rounds 1 and 2 is gonna be Stipe trying to use as much energy as he can to get Jones out of there. That's what I think. I think he's gonna come out guns blazing. I think he's gonna be looking for the knockout early because he knows once the fight is it gets into the latter stages, especially the championship round, that that's when you notice a lot of Jones's opponents' staminas, if you will, or to st- or to decrease. I think he's going to be a lot less conservative than he was in the Daniel Cormier fights, where in those fights it took him a while to get off first, but he knows that he's fighting the most dangerous fighter that MMA has ever seen, and he'll just need to take as many chances as possible and find an opening. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen. He may hurt Jones briefly, but I don't think it'll be enough to where he hurts him briefly and he knocks him down or anything. But he will stagger Jones just briefly. But I'm thinking right now that a mid to late fourth round TKO or sub is where I lean. But I definitely see this going the distance. But I feel like given that this is Jones's swan song and it's literally in New York, which is where he grew up. There's no way how I'd wouldn't see Jones walking out of their victories with some sort of finish before the final bell. So
Yeah, no, Jones could very well finish this fight. I mean, like I said, I think people are slightly overestimating his finishing ability at finishing ability because of the Cyril Gane fight. I could be underestimating his finishing ability at heavyweight. He could just be a different type of finisher at heavyweight, and that
you
could
never
just be
know.
we really can't tell off that one fight, and that could
Right.
just be something that I am wrong about, and he does end up getting the finish. I am not saying that Jones' decision is 100% going to happen. I think Jones will win, but I just think that I do think Stipe might tough it out, but like I told you, I've been all over the place with my prediction for this fight, and it could really go any way for Jones, I think.
And I guess since we're on the side of Jones, what do you think is the one way that Stipe will have a chance to pull off a miracle upset? What do you think? What do you think he has to do?
I mean, simply there's two ways, in my opinion. Okay, the first
Okay.
one would be just knocking him out early. Just catching him and knocking him out early. Obviously, I mean that's any underdog's path to victory, right? He's just catching their opponent and knocking them
Right.
out, especially at heavyweight. But the real path to victory would be pressure. He has to get in Jones' face on the feet early, make him uncomfortable with his boxing, with his jab especially. Um, just constantly be tagging Jones, not with the hardest punches, but just constantly be on him, pressuring, tagging him, and try to just put a pace on him early that eventually, like, he just can't really fully recover from. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's my decision. I think Stipe winning by decision would be like the method, or maybe even a late TKO. But I think that would be his best path to victory is just putting the hands on Jones early and often, and just constantly pawing away at him to the body, to the head. Just give him no room to breathe. Really, don't give him room to use his kicks either.
For sure. Well, I think with that being said, it's a great time to end it. We're obviously going to preview the entire card on the next episode of the MMA Outsiders. But again, before we get out of here, Pat, I just wanted to say congratulations on you being able to cover your first UFC event. It's going to be a blast, and I know it's going to be a busy 72 hours for you around the middle of next week. And
Yeah.
we hope you enjoy UFC 309. Knock on wood that the fight that we just discussed is still on. If what happened last November, about 18 days out. So let's hope that this one doesn't get canceled. Because if this one gets canceled, it'll more than likely never happen.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, at this point,
so, uh,
sadly.
so we'll see.
All right.
Um, Actually, and speaking of before we get out of here, a fan commenting in on YouTube, his screen name is is he Rich, and he said the Ritter is going to sub Mershart in the first round tomorrow night at UFC Vegas 100, which is a very very bold prediction, but I
Very.
could see it.
See, that's the thing. I see this fight either going amazing for De Ritter or horribly, and there's no in between. Like I think he's either gonna go in there and smoke GM3 or gonna go in there and get smoked by GM3. And I'm not fully sure which one I lean yet, but I think I am gonna end up going with De Ritter just because I really do like him. But it's a fun fight. Like that's gonna be so much fun while it lasts.
Yeah, number one, very disappointed it's at the apex, but number two, at the very least, given all the cancellations, at least finally at long last, we can say that it's the co-main event of the evening. So it's that's what the original co-main event should have
Should
been
have
to
been.
begin with, and
Yep.
now we're getting it.
No,
So
completely true. Like I usually guys debuting don't deserve co-main events. This is a different occasion. This is a guy who more than deserves a co-main event in his debut.
for for sure. So for myself, for Pat, for everybody at the Empty the Bench podcast number, thank you again for joining us for this impromptu live stream. We hope you enjoy UFC Vegas 100 tomorrow night. We'll be back to preview UFC 309 and all the other MMA news and happenings next week. But until then, we hope you have a great rest of your weekend. And thanks again for tuning in. Have a good one, guys.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.